So, Swami, yesterday was a magical, not just today, there was a magical moment, I think you were answering some, about how Shakti and consciousness were, the one and the same, like fire and the heat, milk. And, it's just magical just today that something just appeared to me, in my YouTube, the same thing what you said yesterday.
Ah,
It's, you can't explain that. It's really magical. How
yeah,
can
no,
that happen?
that's exactly. I found that it throughout my spiritual life that the divine uh, pulls those little syncopations, those alignments where you
Yeah.
get when Mother wants you to get a point or wants you to see something, you'll hear about it from several different sources in several different angles,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
no, it's I don't think it's accidental. It happens way too frequently.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Yes, slowly all the dots get connected, and you feel like, what's happening? What's the magic happening here? So it's really beautiful.
Yeah, because it is that way. It is magic, because realization is the only effect with no cause, So that's exactly how it comes. At some point, everything aligns, grace descends, and boom, just like a light switch,
Yep.
they say, you know. Thakur says that enlightenment's like a light switch. He says, you go into a dark room and you turn on the light, and it doesn't come on slowly, slowly. He says it comes on all at once, drives out the darkness immediately. And I never quite understood that because I was always like, well, why doesn't it happen that if it happens so suddenly like that? And then I realized you have to find the light switch. So you have to go feeling the whole wall in the dark trying to find the light switch. And when you find the switch, then you just it's a quick, but it could take you 50 years to find that light switch. You
Perfect.
know?
Yeah.
So
Page are we on?
we are on page 209 in the
Oh,
chapter called Advice to Brahmos in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna.
yes.
And gosh, last week we had that wonderful poem. He was talking about the Divine Mother and shared a beautiful poem about the Divine Mother. That just transcendent. If you want to read that poem, it's on 207. But it's just what a wonderful poem for meditation. Just to go through and take each of those lines of how that songwriter describes his relationship with the divine. And it's so deepening, so touching. All right, and then the last thing that happened is Adar had come uh, with a friend of his who had their, I think his son had passed away, and Thakur stands up and gives that little talk about dying. Stand up, to arms, death storms your house. Bearing the quiver of knowledge, mount the chariot of devotion, and bend the bow of your tongue with the bowstring of love, and aim at him the shaft of Mother Kali's holy name. Here is a ruse for the fray. You need no chariot or charioteer. Fight your foe from the Ganges bank, and he is easily slain. So death, is not something to be mealy-mouthed about, to be defeated by, and to be sentimental about. He says, meet it face to face the beast, as it were, fearlessly. Know that death has nothing to do with you, that the body will drop, the mind will drop, or at least the local mind. But you are ever free and ever pure and ever blissful. There is no death for the divine. And that is part of the urgency for realization for us. If we stay identified with the changing, if we stay identified with the thinking mind, if we keep sitting in the mind and twirling thoughts around our fingers and identifying our lower self as being the source, and thinking that we're part of the changing world and that those are our thoughts that describe our states in a body that describes our position and place, then we will experience death, because you'll be identifying with the things that will pass. Anything composed must decompose, Swamiji says. And so if you identify with the body mind, with the changing, then you'll think that you are dying and you will experience that fear and panic. But if through your practice you've managed to find that wiggle space between the self, the mind, and the body, then you have some leverage. And when you see the body beginning to drop, you can gather yourself together in that absolute unchanging within you, that constant sense of I, which is universal and not particular. And if you can move your identity from the mind into that silent shrine of, well, let's say the heart, the shrine of the heart, the cave of the heart, then from there you can witness all the change, untouched, unbroken. So after giving this poem to Adar about death, Ramakrishna says, "What can you do? Be ready for death. Death has entered the house. You must fight him with the weapon of God's holy name. God alone is the doer. I say, O Lord, I do as thou doest through me. I speak as thou speakest through me. I am the machine, and you are the operator. I am the house, and you are the indweller. I am the engine, and you are the engineer. Give your power of attorney to God. One doesn't come to grief through letting a good man assume one's responsibilities. Let his will be done." He's describing a very profound occurrence in the mind. This through discernment and renunciation, we are able to silence the mind and able to become familiar with our internal structure, not just the external world through the senses, but by turning the mind inward, you become aware of your internal structure. And you say, well, what's your internal, what does that mean, your internal structure? Well, it means the mind and all of the patterns of thought that are habitual in there, that you, when you live in mind, when you live in active mind, you identify with those thoughts as being your own, and they come up and they cloud, and they're prompted quite often by the senses. So a sense will bring up a memory of an event that was pleasurable. It will replay that pleasure event for you. Other memories will come up and surround that and put you into a state of mind where you're hungry for that memory, for that pleasure, for that experience that you're imagining from the past. And then you get pulled into that and you create a future because you have to plan for a way to manifest your desire in the present that seems to be missing. And so you then have to create a future for yourself, which supplies you with anxiety. And you try and come up with a plan for manipulating the universe to present your desire in the moment to you. And as we've talked in the past, that whole situation puts us in quite a quandary because you get stuck. You get stuck to the wheel of samsara, as it were, as it rolls down that hill. And all of your memories, which are your attachments, memories are things that you didn't want them just to let them pass through the moment and disappear. The things that you remember, the things that you tried to grab out of the stream of life and share your immortality with them. They're things that you didn't want to go away. And so you grab them and put them in your memory. So your memory represents all of your attachments, all of the things that you didn't want, that you don't let go of, that you hold on to as being, you want them to be permanent. And then those memories, well, the problem with that is then those memories are like lenses in front of your eyes looking at the moment. And because of those lenses looking at the moment, you cannot see and experience the moment as perfect. Those lenses create hunger and thirst. They create a sense of lack. And in that sense of lack, we form our future. And our future is composed of our desires. So your past is composed of your attachments. Your future is composed of your desires. And most people spend their lives bouncing back and forth between those two and never experience a pure moment. But in the moment can be found peace that passes all understanding. In the moment can be found perfect love that emanates spontaneously from your nature, from within you. And in the moment, you find timelessness. Time does not exist in the pure moment. It's conjured by the mind to explain its desires and attachments and weaknesses, and gives room for karma to develop. And so, but all of that belongs to mind. It is not part of the moment. In still mind, there's no time, no causation, no past, present, or future. There is only isness. And in that silence, anything that arises in that silence, Sri Ramakrishna says, is the voice of the divine. And that voice of the divine is the true will, quote, of the universe. And it is the doer. It is what makes everything happen. And we believe ourselves to be the doer, not because we see ourselves doing stuff. We make many, many, many assumptions before we actually fulfill our notion of doership. As soon as we get away with those assumptions, as soon as we put them away or realize that we're making them, it's quite easy to see that we are not in charge of enough of the variables of the moment to actually blame ourselves for doership. We're being led by X numbers of thousands of variables that we have no control over. Where we live, what our genders are, what our bodies are, what our dispositions are, what our financial status is, our family members, all of those things are parts of the puzzle that we don't control as such, seemingly. And so we're not the doer. We seem to be the doer when we're acting almost in accordance with the way of the universe. And so enough stuff lines up that it makes it look like we're doing it. I remember the last time I told you that story about the little kid that was playing that video game where he was steering the wheel and trying to drive the cars around the racetrack, and had to get, his father came to get him to get on the plane. They had to leave, and he was afraid his car would wreck if he didn't drive it. But in fact, he had not put a quarter into the machine, and it was in demo mode. And because his will was to keep the car on the road, and the will of the program was to keep the car on the road, he made the mistake of thinking, I'm keeping the car on the road. And so he was full of anxiety doing his job and was afraid to let go of the steering wheel lest the car crash. But when Dad pulls him away from the steering wheel, everything goes on fine, just as it was going on before. And it turns out that the idea of him being the doer was illusion. And so we do find, not necessarily futuristic, depending on your practice, we do see and recognize the evidence that in fact we are not the doer. We just have enough in common with the mind of the universe by living in it that many times, probably more times than not, we're in alignment with the way things are going. And so we feel responsible. We feel like we're the ones making it happen. One of the easiest ways to see this is to watch your mind for a moment and understand that every thought in your mind, that your mind excretes thought, just like your sweat glands excrete sweat, your mind excretes thought. It's just an organ that excretes thought. And every thought that it excretes is directly related to the previous thought. You are unable to come up with an interruptive original thought that is not based on the previous thought. And that's your clue that you are not the driver. That's your clue. And you can test it. If you find it false, I'm very interested in hearing it. I've been trying it for years, watching the mind and seeing the truth of it. And even when you inject a thought that's out of the flow, it's because the previous thought was about interjecting a thought out of the flow. So you're still within the flow of samskara, that wheel just rolling down the hill. So he's saying here, give your power of attorney to God, surrender to the will of the divine. Now, if you grew up in a Christian world, that's somewhat troubling because, you're always having to give up your will for God's will. And who wants to do that? It's my life. I should be able to have my own will here as such. So we don't like this giving up the will to God. But it's not like that, because we know the ultimate truth is that thou art that the divine will is actually your will. It's actually what you would want if you were perfect. If you were utterly unselfish and utterly free of attachment, the divine will is your will purified. And so to surrender to God is not surrendering to a third party that has a different agenda from you and now wants to spoil your life and your plans. Your surrendering is to your highest ideal. And what happens in that surrendering is, boy, I'm just walking forever on this paragraph here. But the thing is that the mind, that, well, I'll stop there. I keep going. But this notion of purifying the mind so that we can have the clarity to hear that inner voice, to hear this big quotes voice of the universe, voice of the divine, that arises spontaneously within in the moment and has everything necessary for the moment to be navigated perfectly. And so we're trying to calm the mind, trying to remove the fingers of me and mine from the mind. That's what causes thinking. That's what causes disturbance of mind, is those two notions, me and mine. And when you pull those out of the ocean of the mind, then the thoughts can subside. As you lose interest in mind, the mind grows quiet. And so if you have a noisy mind, it's not because you have a noisy mind, it's because you're interested in a noisy mind. And so that's why we're called to do so much discernment, to take things apart. And mainly what we're discerning for is, are things changing or not? If something changes, it's unreal, Ramakrishna says. If it's unchanging, then alone is it the real. And so I've told that story where first time I read that, I got excited because I was like, here's the first real concrete teaching that I can go test. So I ran to the shrine and started thinking about things, trying to find that thing that didn't change. What was the thing that had no change? And I was stumped. Couldn't come up with anything that didn't change. So I went down to the lunch table. Swami Prabhujananda was waiting there at the dinner table, and and I told him about my experiment. I said, Maharaj, I went up, I spent 3 hours just now trying to think of something that didn't change. I can't think of anything that doesn't change. And he had that wonderful kind of impish look that he could get on his face at times. And he looked at me and he said, did you consider who was looking? And that was such a mic drop for me. It was like, boom, oh my God, that's it. That unchangeable is the I within me, that unchanging sense of being that has owned this body and owned this mind and experienced this life, but it itself has never changed. It is the container of all that is. We are not in the world. The world is in us, and we are not actually in a world at all. We are in a mind. And so all of these things become clear to us as we discern and as we renounce and as the inner world grows quiet. And that's when you're ready to die without experiencing death. At that, if you can come to that space before you die, then you can watch the body fall off, but you will not experience death. You can watch the mind still, but you won't experience death. You will keep your awareness, your isness. The body will drop off and you'll look around and you'll be like, well, look at that. The body dropped off and I'm still here. Who would have thunk?
Excuse me, Swami.
Yes, sir.
I read once, or maybe more than once, is it helpful to think of the mind as an organ that doesn't have to be in use constantly? Like,
Yeah.
for instance, like our heart has to be in use constantly. Our lungs have to be in use constantly. But our digestive system doesn't have to be in use. And when we fast, we don't use it.
Mhm.
Obviously our eyes don't have to be in use when we sleep. So I was struck by that idea that the mind is an organ that is fooling us into thinking that it always has to be doing something, but it
Yeah.
actually doesn't. It doesn't have to always be doing something.
Yes. Well, it's because our Western philosophy starts with that idea, I think, therefore I am. And Vivekananda points out he got it backwards. I am, therefore I think. Not I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. Eckhart Tolle makes a huge point of that in his book, The Power of Now, saying that the mind should be silent unless you need it. Unless you have something for it to do in the moment, it should just be silent. And he says it's that the noisy mind is really just an addiction to thought, an addiction to thinking, to entertainment. Because one of the interesting things about mind is how unnecessary thinking is. You think, well, how can that be? How can thinking be unnecessary? Well, think about it. You know, what is thinking? It's a voice in your head saying something to you, and it's a listener in your head listening to it. Now, is that thinker ever going to know more than the listener knows? No, because they're both the same source. They're both the same person. So this idea of sitting and thinking about something, contemplating something like that, is it's a falsification of the experience, because you are talking to you. So you're not figuring anything out, you know. And so that's why they say in realization, when the mind is absolutely placid and still, in the moment, you are provided spontaneously with everything necessary to navigate the moment perfectly. And it happens spontaneously because that infinite knowledge that is you, that chit that is you, you know, that contains everything necessary. And it's not relative knowledge. You know, relative knowledge stays in the head. It has to be recalled and referenced. But spiritual knowledge, spontaneous knowledge, simply is. It doesn't have all the relational accoutrement all scattered through it. And I always use the experience of bending your finger like this. You know, the worldly knowledge is that I say bend my finger and it bends, right? But in fact, the spiritual knowledge is the fact that I have no idea how that happens. I do not know how the ATP, I think it's called ATP or whatever that chemical is that's released that causes the muscles to squeeze, you know, to pull in, contract, here's the word. But I have no idea how that happens. I simply think, finger move, and finger moves. I don't have to know anything about the process. And that's the way life is for the realized soul. Everything necessary is instantly available. There is no querying, no wondering, no calculating, no planning, no nothing. He's in touch with the whole at once, or she, that is in touch with the whole at once. So yes, you're absolutely right. The mind in ideal is quiet when it's not being used. And in that silence is the presence of the divine. You become aware of the presence. You become aware of your bliss. You see within us that Satchitananda is constantly emanating bliss, emanating wisdom, emanating deep being. But it's a steady single note sound with no change in it. And so the mind filters it out as white noise. That's our ignorance. We can't hear our nature. We can't feel our nature because it's been wiped out or whited out by the mind filtering out white noise. And so what we pay attention to is change, right? If you're standing on the beach watching the sunsets, you can be sitting there staring at it and a McDonald's bag will blow across the parking lot. What will your eyes track? Your eyes will track the McDonald's bag, regardless of the profound beauty of distant suns and this confluence of clouds and weather and ocean and mountains to create this phenomenal, intense, beautiful, vision. But what does the mind get drawn to? The bag blowing along the sand. And so this is our trouble. We can't silence our mind because we're accustomed to living in the world of change, and the world of change is constantly distracting us, and we're constantly following McDonald's bags everywhere. And we long ago stopped hearing the silent hum of bliss that is our nature, and the infinite wisdom that is part and parcel of our nature. And we hear only thoughts, only our subset, our story, our ego, the things that are important to ego. All right. So give your power of attorney to God, which means don't make a plan or a move or a calculation on your own. Surrender. everything in the moment to the will of the divine. And he makes a promise. He said, one doesn't come to grief by letting a good man assume one's responsibilities. You're not going to come to grief if you do this. If you surrender to the divine, let his will be done. But isn't your grief for your son only natural? The son is one's own self reborn. Lakshmana ran to Ravana when the latter fell dead on the battlefield. Looking at Ravana's body, he found that every one of his bones was full of holes. Thereupon he said to Rama, O Rama, glory be to your arrows. There is no spot in Ravana's body that they have not pierced. Brother, replied Rama, the holes you see in his bones are not from my arrows. Grief for his sons has pierced them through and through. These holes are the marks of his grief. It has penetrated his very bones. Oh, yeah, see, that's what attachment does. Attachment does. You know, our vices, our ignorance, it doesn't seem to affect us too much. You know, we seem like we can be pretty normal human beings regardless of our state. But in fact, the soul is deeply affected. It bears the wounds. Well, the subtle body, let's say. The subtle body bears the wounds of our vice, of our ignorance. And so if we were able to see that spiritual body, we would see it quite disfigured and quite wounded from our bad decisions. You know, the pain body, as Eckhart Tolle calls it, that carries our karma from body to body. So he's pointing this out in Ravana's body, that his attachments and love for his son, his suffering, has left its mark on his body, his very bones. But house, wife, and children are all transitory. They have only a momentary existence. The palm tree alone is real. One or two fruits have dropped off. Why lament? Right? So he's talking about that unchanging, eternal self within you, that never changes. Things drop off from the outside. Bodies come and go. Minds, local minds come and go. People come and go. Experiences come and go. Objects come and go. And that's the main source of our dispassion, is coming to realize that everything has a time limit, an expiration date on it. So no matter how much you work at attaining something or gathering something, it's going to expire. Everything goes away. And so, you know, it's quite clear. We come into the world with nothing. We walk out of the world, or however we get out of the world. We also leave with nothing. So for the person of wisdom, that should be a very clear answer, that the meaning of life does not involve collecting, you know, acquiring, getting anything. We're not here to get anything in this world, right? We're in this world purely to manifest in the moment our pure nature of love and wisdom and the profundity of being. And that's it. That's the point of life. There's no purpose as such. It's pure isness. And that which you are will always produce beauty in that isness. God is engaged in three kinds of activity: creation, preservation, and destruction. Death is inevitable. All will be destroyed at the time of the dissolution. Nothing will remain. At that time, the Divine Mother will gather up the seeds for the future creation, even as the elderly mistress of the house keeps her hodgepodge pot, little bags of cucumber seeds, sea foam, blue pills, and other miscellaneous things. The Divine Mother will take her seeds out again at the time of the new creation. So you see, everything is brought in. In the Vedanta, there's this idea of this eternal creation that kind of just expands, reaches its limit, contracts, comes back to that full unmanifest potential, then Big Bang again, boom, and it's done all over again. And in some of the books, it even seems to hint that it's the exact same each time, that you and I have sat in front of these monitors in the last yuga, in the last cycle, talking about the exact same things, doing these exact things. And then we were collected up, gathered up, brought back to pure potential, and then boom, it happens all over again.
Maharaj,
Swami, he
Maharaj,
said why we have sorry. Yeah. He said why we have deja vu, because it appears sometimes the exact same moment, we already had this experience before. Is that why?
I'm going to say no, just because our memories, we really don't have access to memory. I can't even remember what happened this morning, let alone what happened, 400 million years ago in my last time around. So I would say no, that's not the explanation. This is extra information. This is extra credit information, because I did read a little article on deja vu one time. And deja vu, he's the man in the article was saying that when you see something first, when you walk into a room, your mind actually takes a snapshot. And then when you continue looking, and the mind then compares it to the snapshot that it took when it first entered to the room, you get a sense of familiarity of already having been there. But I don't know. I really don't know. That it can be very uncanny sometimes. That's because you can almost say what's going to happen next sometimes when that deja vu comes. But I haven't had the experience where I actually knew what was going to happen. I just had the sense that I knew if I could just bring it up, I knew what was going to happen. But I think that's indicatory that I really don't know what's going to happen. That it's not really an experience of a repetition. It's just a mind fart, maybe.
Maharaj,
Yes.
this story, this of the Divine Mother collecting all the seeds and everything, related to the Bible story of the Noah collecting, right? Almost like.
Yeah, surely. Collecting all the animals 2 by
Yeah.
2 into that tiny boat. Yeah, you could draw a parallel there. It'd be an interesting.
And it is in the same thing in the Bhagavatam at the end of the dissolution. Krishna as a little baby lies on a people tree leaf, and with all the seeds in his stomach, they say. So it is pretty much the same concept, I think.
Yeah, just a cycle of cycles.
Yeah.
Yeah, the universe, this manifest world is just cycles of cycles. Vivekananda says everything travels in circles in Maya. And he says the reason for that is it is the only way to mimic infinity in the finite, is to make a circle. A circle is the only thing that you can accurately mimic infinity on, because it has no beginning and it has no end. It simply circles. And so everything, you think about it, everything in Maya, planets go around the sun, the sun, the solar system goes around its black hole at the center of the galaxy, and everything is going in circles, atoms, electrons, planets, stars. And so everything's going in circles, because that is the only way to point to infinity in the finite. All right. So so everything is going to come to an end. So remember that. One of the tricks I used, and it's just a trick for the mind, whenever you see beautiful somebody that takes your mind somewhere, just add 50 years to that beautiful something. If some wonderful car there, well, then just picture that car with its first scratch on it, and then it's just a car. It's like, see things as they are. Don't let that mystical, deluding fog come across your vision, where you start just kind of getting on a loop. Oh, wow. You just keep thinking about the pleasure thoughts or the happy thoughts that involve that object, and you're stuck. Thakur says, if you desire an object, freeze that object in your mind and walk around it in your mind's eye, and look carefully at it, questioning yourself, what is it that you think you will get from this object, O mind? What exactly is your desire for? in this object. And you sit there and you listen until you hear the name of God, a name of God, you know, that everything that you desire in this world is because somewhere tucked in it is a name of the divine. And that name is what you see reflected, and that name is what you desire, not the object itself. The object can never fulfill you. The object can never actually even touch you. You are not material in your true essence. This world is made of mind and not material. And so to look at your desires and discern carefully, what have you placed outside of yourself that you think that you need? And you will find that you have tucked one of your own names, the name of your own divine self, in that object, and been attracted by it and been called to that object. And you'll confuse the object with the name. You'll grab the object and blame the object. But in fact, it was not necessary. That object gave you nothing but an illusion, right? But because for a moment you feel like your desire had been fulfilled, so for that moment your mind quiets because it's not grabbing a desire. And in that slight relaxation and forgetfulness of desire, you become aware of your bliss. That bliss has always been there, but you associate it with the fulfillment of a desire, because it was the fulfillment of the desire that silenced your wants for a moment, to where the stillness of the self could betray its scent of pure love, its scent of bliss. But you'll associate it with the object and then go chasing that object endlessly because you don't want it to end. And so realization is when you come to know all the names of the divine are within you, that they're all being reflected in this world, reflected in consciousness in the mind, and exist in that way only. But they are a reflection of you. Everything that you see, hear, taste, touch, and smell in a day is you. You are not a particular in it. You are the general. Sri Ramakrishna began to talk with Adhar on the veranda north of his room. The master to Adhar: "You are a deputy magistrate. Remember that you have obtained your position through the grace of God. Do not forget him, but remember that all men must one day walk down the same path. We stay in the world only for a couple of days." So, you know, Thakur is giving him an important point here, because what's that? Was that just an odd thing on the computer? Okay. He's teaching Adar here how to minimize egoism. You see, because ego is the veil that prevents you from seeing God at this moment. It's your ego that has created you as separate and apart from the whole, from everything else. And that imbalance has caused your mind to have to completely reinterpret all of reality into a world of objects that are separate from you, and a God that's separate from you and invisible to you. And all of this because you have broken yourself into two people inside, the witness and the thinker. You have become dual inside, and so you're outside because there is no outside. There is only inside. So if you make your inside dual, you experience a dual world. And this is the importance of silent mind, because only in silent mind is there a unity inside, within. And in that unity within, we see the unity without. We see the oneness everywhere. And so he's telling Adhar, you know, all of your attributes that you own, that your ego has grabbed onto, give them back to the divine, give them back to the universal. You know, if God's not the word you want to use, whatever word you want to use is fine, but put them back in the universal. You know, again, break this idea of being particularized and seeing things from a particular perspective all the time. You know, so let go of that. That's what he's telling him. Remember that you've obtained your position through the grace of God. Do not forget him. You know, what is God? God is that nature, pure love. Do not forget pure love. Do not forget your existence, the profundity of this moment. Do not forget that you actually know almost nothing. Keep the questions alive. Keep the discernment alive. Keep that witness within constantly alert. See the mind. See what its relationship to the senses are. See what the senses' relationships with the world around you are. Watch for the patterns. Watch for the repetitions. Watch for the whirlpools that get you caught. That kind of define the story of your life. So do not forget the divine. Do not forget what you are and who you are. Vivekananda tells you, repeat all the time, I am ever free, ever pure. I have never been born. I will never die. I am the ever present Atman. So constantly reinforce these things and do them a lot, because when you're not doing it during the day, the world is giving you the opposite information. The world is pressing you into ignorance. And so you have to have a practice that's dynamic and strong and interesting enough to you that you're fully dedicated, so that you can just take a few hours a day to push back what the rest of the day is deluding you with, and that's that quiet internal space where you sit in the unchanging, watching this display of the self dance in an ever-changing, non-repeating play of color and senses before you. But you are nonplussed. You cannot be touched. It cannot reach you. Where you are is far away from these things. So do not forget him, but remember that all men must one day walk down the same path. We are all walking off the end of the plank. And so live your life like that. Vivekananda says, at least for the monastics, he said, a monk should think about death every day, right? Because thinking about death is one sure way of keeping your eyes on what is important in life. Keeping your mind on the death of the body will encourage you to be loving, encourage you to be awake, encourage you to make the most of the moment, to be fully present, to appreciate the people around you, the beauty around you, to enjoy the walk with God. One of the beautiful verses from the Christian Bible, I think it's in Micah, but it's somewhere in the Old Testament, it might be a psalm, where he says, what does the Lord require of a man but that he enjoys his work and walks humbly with his God? And if you break that down, those two things, all of the Vedanta is indicated in those two commandments. To enjoy your work is going to take all of the teachings of Karma Yoga to make happen, and to walk humbly with your God, to walk without ego, with the divine, with this divine spark that is the essence of all things. So keep it in your mind that this body, this mind, this world, and everything in it will go, so that when it does go, it's not a pain for you, it's not a shock to you. And become dispassionate and detached so that you can let it go when it happens. That's not to say you shouldn't be engaged in life, because life is the divine. So you dive in, but don't forget that it's the divine. Don't forget that it's an ever-changing, unrepeating flow. And it is the play of God. So it can be great fun. But if you imagine yourself to need anything from it, if you imagine yourself to somehow require something of it, then the real fun begins. Suffering comes to the surface, and round you go. We stay in this world only a couple of days. This world is our field of activity. It's interesting because Sri Nisargadatta, he was asked one time, what are you? And he said, I'm simply a place where things happen. So this as the witness, you are simply watching a place where things happen. The world is our field of activity. We are born here to perform certain duties. People have their homes in the country, but come to Calcutta to work. It is necessary to do a certain amount of work. This is a kind of discipline, but one must finish it speedily. While melting gold, the goldsmith uses everything, the bellows, the fan, the pipe, so that he may have the hot fire he needs to melt the metal. After the melting is over, he relaxes and asks his attendant to prepare a smoke for him, All this time, his face has been hot and perspiring, but now he can have a smoke. He's talking here about the beginning of spiritual life, because the point of life, he says over and over again in this book, other places, is realization, is coming to the knowledge of the self, the elimination of ignorance. And so and he says about spiritual life, he says the hard part is the beginning. Unfortunately, the beginning is 99% of the travel. So the beginning is the hard part, because we have to hoist our sail, he says. Once you've hoisted the sail, then the breeze of grace will carry the ship across with no problem. So what is hoisting the sail? Hoisting the sail is not forgetting these things that he just told you not to forget. Don't forget about the impermanence of the world. Don't forget that body and mind are separate from you. Don't forget that you will never die. Don't forget that you don't lack anything, that there is nothing in the world, the material world, to be taken. There is nothing here that you need or that can feed you or give you anything. Everything here is on the same level as body and mind, but will never be able to reach you. So that's hoisting the sail, coming up with good habits to keep the mind clear, coming up with perspectives that are truer to the self so that it doesn't build ego. Coming to the moment, like in karma yoga, where you're mindful about what's directly in front of you. The power of mindfulness is that it removes all of the storytelling that the mind does that feeds ego by what the body mind is doing, And so in that moment, that clarity, that single-minded focus prevents ego from reinforcing itself in the background by saying, oh, I did that so well. Oh, I'm really good at this kind of stuff. Oh, look at that face in the mirror. I'm so handsome. Oh, I'm aging so beautifully. All these things that the ego is constantly collecting to build itself up. Because the ego, and the problem with ego, the reason we want to get rid of it is, one, it's the veil of Maya. It's the reason you can't see the divine. Look at that. But the second thing with ego is that there's no substance to it. There's no there. And so if you are a person composed of ego, or you depend on your ego as your sense of self, you will always be slightly insecure around the edges, which means people can easily make you angry or easily offend you or easily bother you, because the ego is never stable. It's built entirely in the changing world of the past. Ego is composed entirely of your past, and the past has no existence in the present. It has no moment. It's a concept of mind. And so your sense of who you are is built out of a gas, and it has nothing to it. And so you will always be insecure. You will always be needy, and you will never have walls high enough around your ego. That's why somebody can work in this world and make $340 billion and still be out there investing money and trying to get more and starting another company. And, it's like, even on their deathbed, they'll be going over the accounting statistics for their package. It's like, that's because they are experiencing that utter insecurity of egoism. And so we want to break that out. We want to get out of there. So that is the work that we're doing in this world. The work that we're doing in the world is an undoing of the things that have caught us in the world. Vivekananda says that religion is not about teaching us not to enjoy the world. He said that's a mistake to think that. Religion is teaching you how to enjoy the world so you don't get stuck in it, so you don't get flipped around over and over on this wheel of samsara as it goes rolling down that rocky hill, right? One must have stern determination. That's that focus. One of the things that Vivekananda has looked at me many times in my mind's eye and shaken his head, because one of the problems with being a worldly person is you don't have any stuff in you. It's like you can go and have a great meditation and a great service at the temple and be on a big high, and then that night be out drinking with your friends. It's like there's no stuff there. You're not holding on to the accumulation of your spiritual practice, your bliss, your joy. You get up, you do your hour of work and of practice in the morning, you feel great about the day. As soon as you get on the bus, or get in the car, you're sitting there experiencing your road rage. And by the time you get to the office, all of that wonderful accumulation of your practice that morning has already been expended, and you haven't even started the day at the office. So we have to have some grit in us. Our yeses have to be yes, our no's have to be no. We have to take control of this chariot. We can't let the senses drive this chariot where it goes. We have to drive it from within, right? And it's not based on desires. It's based on a response of nature to itself. It's a spontaneous, uncalculated existence in the moment. One must have stern determination. Then alone is spiritual practice possible. All right. So if you don't have that strength of character, there can be none of this wishy-washiness, none of this sentimentality. What is sentimentality? Sentimentality is your practice of devotion with no renunciation. Sentimentality is simply devotion with no renunciation. If you have no renunciation, then your devotion is sentiment. It's not power. It's not power. It doesn't have that punch in it. So you want to have this single-minded determination. If you say yes to something, it means yes. If you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. It's never, oh, I don't feel like it right now. Oh, I'm not in the mood for that. Oh, no, I can't possibly do that right now. Oh, I'm going to stay in bed another 10 minutes. No. What is that? None of that. Strengthen that sword. Strengthen that inner self. Drive the ship through discernment and not through the senses. One must make a firm resolve. I am going to realize God. I am not going to get distracted. I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to be weak. I'm not going to play tapes of false desires, false pleasures, false memories in my mind until I chase after them. I live a life that is the manifestation of love in the moment, and that's my purpose. There is great power in the seed of God's name. Absolutely, the divine name and the divine form, the name and form cannot be separated. Where the mantra is with the name of God, there God is also. So when you say the name of God in your mind, the power of it is that is in fact God. When you say the name, that is God. And they come together all the time. You can't talk about milk without thinking of milk, without the presence of milk in the mind. You can't say flower without seeing a flower in the mind. And so when you say the divine name, that divine presence is invoked, and it's much bigger, and it's not something you can look at because that's the fun of it. It is you. You're fully convinced it's something else, but that divine name is ultimately bringing your attention back to itself. You become aware of your awareness, and in that is your bliss and your freedom. There's great power in the seed of God's name. It destroys ignorance. And I always play on this word because it's really true about what's going on with ignorance. Ignorance is ignorance, right? It's when you know the right thing to do, but you don't want to do it. But you don't want to admit that you don't want to do the right thing. So you just kind of come up with ways of keeping that thought over there, and usually you turn to vices to provide the distraction, to kind of, I want to do what I want to do, but you feel the suffering because it's against your nature to do that thing. You're only doing it out of habit, and you shouldn't do it. And so you employ your ignorance. You ignore the spontaneous pushing of your nature inside that's saying no, or the conscience coming in and saying do. You're like, no, you're pushing the conscience away. That's what ignorance is. It's ignoring your nature, refusing to be what you are and playing the game according to what you think you are as opposed to what you are, right? So God's name, invoking the divine name within the mind, is the antidote to this. It helps you develop that single-mindedness, that focus. It helps you to keep your mind on the presence of pure love, on the presence of wisdom. It helps you from to not fall into the idea of being a taker from the world and trying to get something out of the world that you can't get. So it destroys all of these forms of ignorance. A seed is tender and the sprout soft, and still it pierces the hard ground. The ground breaks and makes way for the sprout. Yeah. This is nice in the sense that this is your guarantee of success. If you know, everybody comes home, Thakur says. It's really just a matter of how soon and when. It's a matter of time. In some way, these are all just ways of talking about this thing. Because actually it's all already is. Everything is already as it should be. The mind becomes very much distracted if one lives long in the midst of lust and greed or woman and gold. Therefore, one must be very careful. But monks do not have much to fear. The real sannyasi lives away from lust and greed. Therefore, through the practice of spiritual discipline, he can always fix his mind on God. True sannyasis, sannyasi is a monk who's renounced the world, said God and God alone for me, nothing else. So a true sannyasi, someone who's actually doing this, who are able to devote their minds constantly to God. They're like bees, which light only on flowers and sip their honey. Those who live in the world in the midst of lust and greed, they may direct their attention to God, but sometimes their mind also dwells on lust and greed. They're like common houseflies, which will land on a piece of candy and then land on a sore and then land on a piece of poop, a piece of filth. You know, that a worldly person will gather his joy from any place he can. It does, his joy does not come from the divine, right? Not enough energy, not enough work has gone into clearing the mind to where that's actually enjoyable, to where he's actually had an experience of that presence within himself. He's caught in the noise and is enjoying different forms of noise. And so this is where we get stuck, and that's what takes our stuff out of us, our ability to determine a discipline, a place, and go get it done. It's the distracting force in us. You know, the senses are the distracting force. The ego is the distracting force. You know, constantly giving us a list of things to do. He says, always keep your mind fixed on God. In the beginning, you must struggle a little. Later on, you'll enjoy your pension. All right, so it's again, that's pointing to just establishing the habits. That's the hard part. Undoing the bad habits and establishing good habits. That's the work. That's the effort. And in the beginning, it's very difficult. And that beginning can be a long time. But thankfully, Mother, the Divine Mother, however you want to talk about those things, the Divine Mother will give you little hints, little tastes of candy here and there, just enough to make you desire more and to wonder, where did that come from? What was that? You know, so she's kind enough to give us a few trinkets here and there to keep us interested on the path. But she won't give you a lot from the front because she doesn't want you to become a spiritual materialist, where you're becoming spiritual because you're just enjoying things in a different form. You know, you want your mind to come off of the enjoyments and the feelings of happiness and all of that and go to the self itself. Look past all of those things and see from where they emanate, from where they come. All right. Oh, it's 8. Oh my gosh, it's 8:05. All right. Well, perfect place to stop because we're now on changing dates to Sunday, April 15th. Let me turn off the recorder here.